Hey, DCL podcast fans, the Disney Wonder is up in Alaska this summer, but when she finishes up with her Alaska sailings, she's going to be headed over for the first time over to Hawaii, then the Trans-Pacific over to Australia, where she's going to be sailing around Australia and New Zealand for most of the winter. And pretty excited to bring this episode to you. Brett, he's been on our show several times, just an amazing friend of our show. He's always got a really interesting take as far as where he travels with his parents. Generally, he's been on the Transatlantics, also around England, and has a vast experience with Disney Cruise Line as well. So I hope you enjoyed this first peek into Australia and New Zealand as we get ready for the Disney Wonder, as she gets ready to sail around Australia and New Zealand for the first time. And as they say, on with the show. Enjoy, everybody. Well, hello, and welcome once again to the DCL podcast, where we're inviting you to sit back, relax, and we'll be on our way shortly. Well, welcome back to the DCL podcast, your podcast to help you cruise a little smarter. And I'd like to welcome back all the way down in Florida. How you doing today, Christy?
I'm well. How are you, Steve?
Not too bad. You like it when I surprise you, don't I? Or don't you?
No. Yeah, tell everybody when you asked me to join this podcast.
So Chris was originally supposed to help me out in this interview, and she texted me about 5 minutes before we were supposed to start saying she had a migraine. And so I was like, hey, Christy, if you want to talk about a fun trip, if you want to jump on quick, it'd be awesome. And you did.
I did. So I wasn't prepared. However, when you were first scheduling and talking about doing these different podcasts, I really wanted to do this one. So I do feel like it sort of worked out that I get to be here for it.
Everything
the universe aligned.
The universe, that's what I was trying to get. The universe aligned, the spirits all came together, and here we are. I'd like to welcome back to the podcast. He's been with us several times before, recounting his trips on the Transatlantic and also over in England. And I've been able to be on his podcast as well. The amazing host of Notably Disney. Welcome back to the podcast, Brett. How are you doing today?
Hi there, Steve and Christy. Always good to see you both. Excited to talk about this trip.
Oh my gosh. When you reached out and told me what you were doing over Christmas, I was like, our family was going on a cruise at Christmas time too, but it doesn't quite compare to what you guys did.
No, he wins.
I feel like everybody has been comparing their winter breaks versus mine and feeling like they lost, but it's not competition. It was a long-awaited trip to Australia, New Zealand, a much delayed trip as well.
When were you originally going to do it?
December 2020.
Oh,
so
yeah,
pushed it
that
back
was
2
delayed.
years.
That little thing, the pandemic, kind of put a crimp in the plans and whatnot. Before we jump into it, Brett, and talk about this cruise, why don't you remind all our listeners a little bit about your cruising and your Disney background?
Cruising background includes sailing on Disney Cruise Line 7 times, starting in December 2011. So I've been on the Magic, the Wonder, and the Fantasy, almost all of them Caribbean cruises. And then, as you mentioned, one of them on the Transatlantic. That was the first time I met all of you 5 years ago. Time is flying. And I've also sailed on Royal Caribbean on the Brilliance of the Seas. Chat with you about that. That was in summer 2019. And Disney background, as you mentioned, I host the Notably Disney podcast, focus on interviews and discussions around Disney music and books, and a huge aficionado of all things mouse. That brings me to today to talk about a non-Disney experience, but nonetheless has some connections, because we know that the Wonder is heading down under at the end of 2023. And I certainly love to travel. And hopefully there will be some different components that we talk about today that might be helpful for listeners if they think about making a trip to New Zealand and or Australia.
So you picked the Norwegian Spirit for your cruise. Can let us know, how did you come up, like, why Norwegian versus another cruise line? How did you come up with this particular cruise to take?
Yeah, well, several years ago, my folks and I were exploring how to essentially visit New Zealand and Australia. And it made sense to go the cruise route because we're familiar with that type of experience, and it allows us to cover a lot of ground in a relatively short period of time. So we landed on Norwegian essentially because we're trying to find a cruise line that goes to a bunch of different destinations. And also, very importantly, we wanted it to be a non-round trip option. So basically where our end port would be different than our starting port. So we found this particular voyage, which started in Sydney Australia, and then concluded in Auckland, New Zealand. Now, Royal Caribbean has, at different points, had a bunch of round trip cruises out of Sydney, but because we wanted to have a bit more time in another destination, that's ultimately why we went with Norwegian.
That's a super smart way to do it, to make sure you're really maximizing. And it's a long flight. It's like 15 hours from LA to Sydney. So it's a commitment to make it there. That's a really good way to do it. What a smart path.
Yeah, and thankfully we have the flexibility too. So like I'm now a professor, and so my time is limited to either winter break or summer for extensive periods of time. So it worked out wonderfully that our cruise sail date was like December 20th, thereabouts, 21st or so. So it was a great period of time.
To put a little context too, and I'm sure that was this your first time down in Australia, New Zealand?
Yeah, never been in that part of the world.
So I've been lucky to get down there twice. And for people that haven't been down there, Australia and New Zealand are very different countries. So being able to spend time in both of them in the way you did that, so you can explore Australia a little bit ahead of time and then go through the cruise to these different countries. We'll find out if you stayed in New Zealand for a little bit afterwards, but definitely that's a great way to do it if you're gonna head down there, because they're such different countries. So let's jump into it. You guys leave out of Sydney. How did you guys get down to Sydney, and where did you stay ahead? Did you spend a couple of days in Sydney before the cruise?
Yeah, we did, and we opted for actually booking our flight arrangements through Norwegian directly. So as part of like a vacation package, that had its drawbacks because it meant that you don't find out your flight arrangements until about a month before. That was tricky. So we did stay in Sydney for a few days before, but it meant going from Phoenix, our starting point, to Vancouver, out of the way, 3.5 hours, long layover there, and then from there to Sydney. So it was basically 25 hours worth of travel. The way back also involved going in kind of the opposite direction. We went from Auckland to Brisbane to LA to Phoenix. So all that to say, some additional frustration associated with that, but the price was awesome, especially when you're looking at airline prices these days. It was incredible savings. Yeah, we had the delight of arriving in Sydney on a Monday morning, having not slept at all for like 2 days, and still having the rest of that Monday to explore. And then we had two full days beyond that.
Did you use Norwegian to book the hotels for you then too? Did they book the whole package?
No, we selected the hotel. We went with Norwegian's recommendation for where to stay in Sydney. However, for Auckland, our departure, we actually opted for a different establishment.
Okay. And Sydney's a pretty walkable city. From what I remember we stayed outside of Sydney and took the train in and explored it. Did you guys just stay in Sydney, or what were you able to see over those 2 days? What were some of your highlights?
Boy, we covered a lot of ground. We went to a few of the main places to sightsee, including the Taronga Zoo, which is a world-class zoo that actually is on the Sydney Harbor. It overlooked the city. You actually have to take a little ferry to get over there from roughly the Sydney Opera House area. And it was an incredible zoo. It's featured, actually has a Disney connection on Nat Geo's series where you can, I think it's called like Secrets of the Zoo or something along those lines.
Ooh.
And there's a whole set of seasons related to just the operations at the zoo. So there was already that familiarity. It's an incredible place in terms of the immersiveness of the exhibits, the diversity of animals. Of course, we saw the koalas and kangaroos and so forth. We saw some dingo puppies. The dingo puppies had just been born. We got to see a little demonstration with them. They were just running around an exhibit. So that was a highlight. I could mention a few others. We took a kind of a tour around the city. It was supposed to be a group tour. It ended up being a private tour because nobody else showed up. So basically covered everywhere in the city over the course of 3 hours. We passed by some sites like Bondi Beach, which the city is known for. We took a tour of the Sydney Opera House and I got to see the performance venues. There's multiple venues in there and just absolutely stunning. We had ate at some good places. We really packed a lot in those 2.5 days because we knew that, this could be our only opportunity, or at the very least, we probably won't be back here for a while because it's so arduous to get over to Sydney. So we tried to cover a lot of ground.
Just to put it in perspective, too, December is actually summertime in Australia. How was the weather down there while you were there?
You would never have known that it was summertime. It was chilly.
Oh
For
no.
the days that we were there, it was in the 60s. There was a lot of wind. That was actually throughout much of our time on the cruise. There were some warmer days to be sure, but it was a cooler summer so far, at least when we were there. So we could have used a little bit warmer clothing at times, but it was still very nice compared to what everyone was dealing with in the States around that time with the massive snowstorms. So we still felt lucky.
And, if you're doing touring and walking around towns and trying to it is a little bit nicer to have it be a little bit cooler.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
I'm still going back to those dingo puppies because I think they may have surpassed sled dog puppies, Christy.
Oh, that sounds like it. Can I start calling you Dingo Puppy? That's going to be your new name.
I like dingo. Dingoes. Dingo. But you got to get the accent, right?
Yeah. Oh, I won't even try to attempt
Yeah,
that.
no, absolutely not. That is not happening.
All right. One more quick question. Was there a food that stood out for you in Australia, Brett, while you were down there?
Well, I'm probably the worst person to ask for this because I'm vegetarian with mostly vegan tendencies. So like people have asked me about like the barbecue scene or the seafood, and I can't really give any perspective to that. But what I can say is that what was really interesting, and perhaps I should have realized this in advance, is that there was a much stronger Asian food influence down there. And I think that is because a lot of the tourism industry and residents are Asian and from Asian countries. And so I think for folks who love that flavor, or those flavors, I should say, will really be in for a treat. I'll tell you about interesting food that we had, and it has an Asian food connection. We went to this place called Graham Cafe and Pancakes, and it's essentially, it was like this little eatery that they had these like fluffy pancakes. They almost looked like a souffle of sorts, but they're these like puffy pancakes, and you could get like lots of different unique toppings on them. I had never heard about this. I had mine with like, weirdly enough, like a bean paste, but it was actually quite good. I like beans. It actually wasn't gross, but
Okay.
but I
You
promise,
should have
like,
seen my face.
oh yes, words cannot describe the visual of when I describe that. But it was actually really interesting and something that I probably ordinarily wouldn't have tried. But I mean, it wasn't Australian food per se. It was more of an Asian specialty. But it was kind of cool.
Where did you do your research to decide where to eat or what to do? And
I give my mom a lot of credit for that. So I traveled with both my parents, and we've gone on all of our cruises together, although they've now abandoned me and gone on some fun cruises of their own, which I will not talk about. But in any case, yeah, we did a lot of thorough research, and a lot of that connects back to that. My mom and I are vegetarian, so we really need to be mindful of finding places that suit our needs. What was also an interesting component, and this I think is a transferable point that's important for listeners to realize, we were traveling not only the traditional Christmas holidays, but also the holiday season for many Australians and New Zealanders extends into the first week of January. So as a result, a lot of places that we had looked up and planned on going to were closed. So all the planning, it helped us for a bunch of places, but once we were in Auckland, we were out of luck because there was a lot that was closed. So check into that in advance if you can, because otherwise you might have to make some rearrangements.
Good to know there. Well, let's stick with the planning for just a couple more minutes. How about the cruise itself? You guys stopped at so many different ports. Did you use Norwegian's cruise website, or what did you do? How did you plan for what you guys wanted to do in the different ports? Or was your mom kind of instigated for that as well?
I think this is where it's nice. I think everybody had their designated roles. So mom was in charge of food. Dad took control of a lot of the excursion opportunities, or at the very least identified them, and then we discussed them collectively. Half of the excursions were through Norwegian directly. The other half, or at least several, were through ShoreX, ShoreX excursions. And we can talk about excursions later. It was kind of it was a mixed bag. Some were stronger than others, but that's usually what happens with any cruise. And I will say that there were, by the time you got on the ship, there were very few excursions through Norwegian directly that were still available. So that really reaffirms that you need to make those arrangements in advance, or otherwise your options might be more limited.
do you remember back in the day before the internet and the Facebook groups and all the things. I mean, maybe there was some internet, but you used to be able to, when you booked your shore excursion, is when you got on and you got that book and it went through like all of the activities. Sometimes I miss the olden days.
I felt like you had a lot more information in some ways then. Like maybe it was not more information. It was just easier to disseminate, I guess, or something. Like now it's like you could go through like all these Instagram pages and see what everybody else is doing and everything like that. But I thought it was just a little bit easier to make some decisions then.
Back in the olden days.
Okay, let's get you on the ship then, Brett. So you guys leave out of Sydney and quite a different variety of ports that you're going to stop at over Australia, Tasmania, and then over to New Zealand as well. What were your thoughts about Norwegian? This is the first time sailing with Norwegian on a little bit of older ship, the Norwegian Spirit, which is kind of similar to the Jade, which was our first cruise, a little smaller ship. I'll put it in context. I think it's about the size of, say, the Magic or the Wonder. What were your thoughts of the ship overall?
Yeah, actually, I would say it's even probably a bit smaller than the smallest Disney ships. And the reason why was when I was walking around, I'm like, wow, it doesn't take me very long to get from one end to the other. And then I learned that the passenger limit for the ship is only 2,100. So it's a little bit smaller. And our cruise felt even smaller than that because there were only about 1,500 passengers. So only about 2/3 occupied. How did I feel about the ship? You walk on, it was recently renovated. So I think the ship's about 20 years old. It got a refresh. What that basically amounted to was that they renovated some of the adult like nightclub space and some of the eateries. It did feel fresh, which was nice. It felt clean. What was frustrating, and I don't want to be too negative, is that the entertainment was lacking, both in terms of quality and frequency. The main performances on the ship were excellent. The cast of the main shows, wonderful singers and dancers. Like I would say, better than my previous experience of sailing with even Disney and Royal. And that's not this. I think it was just the quality on that front. But the guest entertainers felt very middle of the road, and there just wasn't a lot happening. So you go on a Disney cruise, and usually there's a bunch of things to choose from. There's a comedian. There's lots of movies. There's a lot to do. There just wasn't as much on this. So I feel like that kind of tainted the experience a little bit, because it just felt underwhelming. Even on the sea days, that we had 3 consecutive sea days kind of toward the first half of our voyage. And so the ship itself was nice. I liked the venues. It just felt you kind of wanted more, or at least that's maybe my frame of reference and how I've cruised. So not the most thrilled, but it was still a mechanism to get to where we wanted to go to. And what was also reassuring is we weren't the only ones who felt that way. We talked with a bunch of other cruisers later in the voyage who were saying that, yeah, we've been on other cruise lines and it wasn't great. There were some also customer service issues at times where some of the staff members weren't the most accommodating or pleasant. Not that will totally dissuade me from sailing with Norwegian again, but it wouldn't be high on my list.
That's good feedback.
I mean, this sounds like the cruise that I might actually get to read my book that I bring with and I never actually read. So
I did read a whole book during the cruise. So when I was bored, I was basically reading a book, or I took my laptop into this amazing venue on the ship called the Spinnaker's Observation Lounge. It was in the front of the ship, floor to ceiling windows. It was beautiful. This is where a lot of the nighttime activities were held. But I brought my laptop in there and I was working on some of my research. I'm like, okay, there's nothing to do. I'm just going to get a bit of work done and look at this beautiful view and watch the waves. So yeah,
not a bad place for a home office there, I guess.
No, not at all.
So touch on a couple more things. Christy, I'll let you talk about the cabin, but food wise, Norwegian's kind of known for their, eat anytime. What am I looking for? What do they call it?
Freestyle
cruising and everything like that. And of course, they've got specialty restaurants, which tend to be a little bit better from our experience than the main dining rooms. What was your thoughts overall with the food with Norwegian?
It was okay. And again, that's my vantage point as a vegetarian. So, right, I don't have as much in the way of options. The buffet had a lot, which was good. It was probably on par with Cabanas on Disney in that respect. There was a separate vegetarian section, which was nice, even though you could still get stuff from other stations. It was styled very much like a buffet on any other cruise line. The main dining venues, we only ate in the main dining room once. It was fine. It just, I like the character and the fun of being in a Disney dining room, and it just doesn't have that. The food quality was okay. Some things were better than others, but the desserts were nothing spectacular. The main dishes, I mean, you're also on a cruise for 12 days. At times it felt a bit repetitive, or like I love hummus. There was no hummus until like day 10 for Mediterranean night. I'm like, where's the hummus? People are used to hummus. At least I think so. I wanted more avocado, like just other, I don't know, other things that are staples, I guess, in my diet, I guess. But so the food was kind of adequate. We got excited when we could be at the port and like go out to lunch and have some different options. It's like the people actually at some of the stands, they knew us, like they saw us and they're like, would you like us to put up a veggie burger for you? Because we had been there like the 3 consecutive days. So that was nice. Like the pasta person knew us very well, but yeah, not the greatest variety.
Did you eat at any of the specialty restaurants?
No, okay. It wasn't worth it for us.
It's just all different, right? Like, you know what you're going for, the savings and for the different ports and the different itineraries and maybe the different items to do on a ship, and, your food and or maybe entertainment options aren't going to be top, like the highest priority for those ships.
Right. And I don't think it's across the fleet, right? Like this is an older ship. They don't have as much in the, so yeah, I think you're right. I think adopting that perspective is totally appropriate. But I'll tell you something that everybody would be upset about. The frozen yogurt machines were not working the entire cruise.
Aw.
Sounds like
was there at least ice cream in the buffet? There
was. I didn't even try it, and my parents said it was kind of adequate. So like wasn't worth it.
I wonder about the entertainment, because if it's port intense cruises and the excursions are long, I wonder if they're like, maybe people aren't going to go. I mean, the 3 days of sea days in a row, what else are people doing, right? Like give them some entertainment then. But I remember on my celebrity cruise in Europe, it was a 12-night cruise, and maybe we went to the show once. It was just that we were so exhausted from running around all day that we would eat and chill, and to sit and to be, even having my mind engaged, it wasn't something I was interested in after those days. So I wonder if it's a mindset like that.
That's possible. And there definitely was an older crowd, right? So they said the average age of the ship, I thought I had noted this, it was definitely average age, I think, was in the upper 50s. Demographically, like half the people were from the States, a bunch from Australia, New Zealand, some from the UK and Canada. But you could tell that the crowd, it was definitely more laid back, which is fine. Everybody wants to experience it differently. But even at the performances, like the main productions were fantastic. There was a country music theme show, one related to music from around the world, another that related to like the different like fire and air and water and their cool special effects. The crowd was like very like mediocre in terms of responding to it. Like there were some people not clapping or very tepid. And like, I mean, I'll give them credit that the main performances were stellar, and they just weren't feeling it. So it was a very different vibe. Even they had game shows, but there wasn't always a lot of participation, or people weren't the most enthused. So, and you can't do a whole lot about that, but you also have to set the foundation. And the staff was okay, but not nearly the quality of the cruise staff on Disney. So I must sound so pessimistic, but I'm giving a really, I think, reflective picture of having been on Disney and knowing what that represents. And so very different.
Yeah, I think it's a fair picture that you're painting, and that's what people should hear, because it's a long ways to go and to take this cruise. And as we're going to get into it here in just a couple of seconds here, the main reason why you're going there is to see the ports, right? Not to spend time on a cruise ship necessarily, and that's your vehicle to get you to where you're going. But Christy, I was wondering if you could just touch on the cabins just real quick and kind of how that worked out for them.
Yeah. So you were cruising with your parents. What kind of cabin did you book? And were you in one cabin? Did you have two? How did that work for you guys?
It was a full house and a stateroom with a veranda. Yeah, it was tight. The staterooms are general, and we all know this, right? Disney staterooms tend to be bigger. They have the split bathrooms. That was not the case here. I did the pull-out couch, and it was actually so firm. It felt like I was laying on a rock. There was like no cushion. The stateroom attendant was wonderful. She brought in extra blankets to add some cushion. So I felt like it was a little bit more supported. And then she actually brought in a whole mattress from a bunk bed, which was really nice because it would have been extremely uncomfortable for a whole week. But it was nice to have the view through the veranda. Everything was updated and polished and nice. The stateroom worked out actually really well for us. So, but nonetheless, 3 adults, it's still a little tight.
Yeah, those staterooms are really tight, aren't they, Christy?
They are. They are.
And
it's one thing if you're like putting a couple of little kids in it or something, right? But to have, as Brett said, 3 grown adults, it makes it tough.
So that brings up a good question too, Brett. Since you guys had a veranda with the different ports you stopped at, is this a cruise that you think a veranda is worthwhile spending the money on with all the different ports you stop at?
That's a really good question. I think it depends on what you want to invest your time in. Generally, I would say, no, you can just go on the upper decks and just sit out on a lounge chair there. By the same token, there wasn't as much entertainment, so you might be inclined to just be sitting out and watching everything. But again, if you are at sea for those 3 days, there's nothing to look at on the days when you're at port. It's beautiful, especially the day. It was a sea day when we were cruising through the fjords, Fjordland National Park, the sounds down there. That I think could be worth it. I guess if there's not much of a price difference, I'd say invest in it. But I think everybody has their different priorities, right? If you're the type of person who's going to take a nap on your lounge chair on the veranda or read a book, maybe so, especially if you do feel a little cramped in the room. But
they're...
Oh, no, please. I was just going to say it was just a beautiful destination. So I think you're going to luck out whatever you do.
And the veranda rooms are a little bit bigger typically, especially on other cruise lines. And even on Disney, they often tend to be slightly bigger. So it's just something you're getting a little more real estate. So yes, it comes with more money, but you also have outside space and then you have more real estate in the cabin, which is helpful, especially when there's 3 grownups in the cabin.
So let's get your cruise underway. We've talked about the ship. We talked about spending time in Sydney. I would imagine that sailing out of Sydney Harbor is pretty iconic, seeing the Opera House, the bridge, and everything else.
Yeah, that was stellar. Probably my favorite port to sail out of, not only the start of the cruise, but just at any time during the cruise. It was amazing because it really, you board right near the Sydney Opera House, and we were departing, and I made it my Facebook picture where the Sydney Opera House is in the background. That was from our veranda, actually. So yeah, that was one of the benefits if we didn't feel like going out on the main deck. So, and it's a good little journey. It's not like you're out on the open ocean immediately. It was stunning to sail out of and afforded just a sense of peace and tranquility.
From Sydney, then you start off, and I'm going to hopefully say these names right, but you start off and you stop in Eden, Australia?
Yeah, it's a little sea town that's not too far from Sydney. And we went on an excursion along the Sapphire Coast, which has just a lot of nice towns by the sea. There wasn't a whole lot to it, but we went to a killer whale museum, which had this skeletons of a killer whale, and we learned about the whaling industry. Took some nice walks down there, some pretty pictures. It wasn't anything remarkable, but we were glad to have gone off the ship and to explore a little bit. I don't really have a whole lot to say about Eden, but it worked out. It's not a huge metropolitan area, just a bunch of little seaside towns. And we took a bus when we were walking along the main street of one of the towns. We saw it's an animal called a skink. It's a lizard with, or it almost looks like a short snake, but with little legs. And the skink was trying to run into the street, but then our tour guide actually picked it up by its tail and brought into a little garden nearby. She was very heroic and saved the skink. So that was a highlight.
Not. No. Mm-mm.
Yeah, yeah, we had the same reaction. She was quite daring.
So to kind of put it in context, I've been to Melbourne before, and then we've gone west of Melbourne. It's called the Great Ocean Road. It's very similar to kind of California coastline, I think, maybe kind of in between Southern and Northern California. I suppose the Sapphire, what do you call it? Sapphire?
Yeah, Sapphire Coast. Yeah.
Sapphire Coast is probably similar to that. So for people wondering like what it's kind of like, and Melbourne kind of gets kind of similar vibes to Los Angeles as far as the weather goes. So that's kind of the idea of the coastline there around the southern part of Australia, that as far as I understand it.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really appropriate parallel, because when I was in Melbourne, which we can talk about, I actually had some San Diego vibes a little bit in terms of the downtown area, at least. But the Sapphire Coast, I think, yeah, it is like a lot of coastal towns in California.
Surfing and everything else. So from there, you went to a place that I've always wanted to go to, Tasmania, which is an island on the south coast of Australia. You stopped in Burnie. What was that like?
Yeah, we went on an excursion where we went to this wildlife park that essentially rehabilitates injured animals, a lot of native Australian birds and some rodents, but primarily kangaroos and Tasmanian devils. And that was very cool from the standpoint they had this huge pasture of sorts where you could feed kangaroos. You could go up to them and take photos. And I'm always mindful, like, I don't want to engage in anything that feels exploitative or where I could, be harming the animals, or where I could be. And I didn't quite feel that there. It was very comfortable. Like, they would, if they didn't want to be near you, they would just hop away. And they were very mellow and very much felt domesticated in a sense. That was very cool. There was an adorable set of photos that we all took of two kangaroos that were like hugging one another. I'll see if I can at least show you both as we talk and make the listeners just imagine how cute this is. But there were probably a few dozen kangaroos in this enclosure, and it was just so peaceful, and it was such a unique experience. At a lot of the main zoos, you would have to pay extra for an experience along those lines, but this was incorporated into the experience. I'll show you the picture right there.
Are we sure they're hugging and not fighting?
Oh, they were hugging. I would take it as that. So.
We'll have to put that in the show notes. Fun random fact: if you would like to see a kangaroo exhibit in the United States, the Detroit Zoo, which is located in Royal Oak of all places, Michigan, has a whole giant kangaroo exhibit. Huge awesome. Kangaroo exhibit. And they free roam. There's these doors you walk through so that kangaroos not getting out, like one on each side, and little rooms to hold into. And then the kangaroos just go and live their best little kangaroo life, or people walk on a path.
That's awesome.
Okay. I don't know how to transition from that.
Nothing can top that. It was it's nice that there are those experiences, and it was nice too. We really felt like going to a place like that like we were really helping sustain the operations of this, like almost like small mom and pop wildlife park.
Who did you book that one through?
That one was through Norwegian as well, and there were other excursions where this was like a component of it. So there were other buses coming in as well. So. And that's what you felt consistently through touring New Zealand and Australia, and I imagine other countries as well. These places thrive on tourism. So they were so appreciative that you're spending your time and money on their business. So that was it. You felt that warm welcome everywhere.
I think a lot of people got to feel that in some of the cruises when they first started coming back. And I think something to kind of note too is Australia kind of opened up a little bit later than the rest of us. So you were, I'm not sure, probably 6 months to a year from them really getting cruises going again back in Australia, Brett, from when you guys went. Am I right on that, Christy, or do you remember?
I mean, it was a huge delay.
Yeah, they were delayed a lot longer than the rest of us. So I'm sure that they were pretty appreciative of you coming back and spending time. Just kind of in general, then thinking about these ports, and maybe I'm sure they probably had different times how the length of stay in each one of them, but were you able to kind of like go do an excursion and then spend some time in the port city itself usually, or was it mostly just doing the excursion and coming back?
That's a good question. I think it really varied depending on the port. So some of these smaller places, that basically encompassed most of the day. And this is no different than I think some of the Caribbean ports or European ports. At times, there's not much around the port. Like, it's not very walkable. For some of them, we had to take buses from right when you get off the ship to the main part of town. So with Eden and Burtney, Australia, like I think if I got that right, I don't recall walking around the port. And often there's not a whole lot of time, and that's depending on the length of the excursion. So our Melbourne day, for instance, if you're okay with me shifting into that, we were there Christmas Day. So nothing was open. And we were kind of freaking out. Okay, well, what are we going to do? Because if there's nowhere to eat, there's really not much in the way of tours happening. Well, thankfully, the Melbourne Zoo was open. So we spent much of the day there. And then after that, we were walking around the city, which I definitely got the vibes that you were describing, Steve, but there wasn't much to do. That's not reflective of the city. It was just the timing. But I'm sure we would have enjoyed it even more if it felt like it was, bustling.
It's just such a cool downtown area when it's open. I've been down there a couple different times. I know there's like a market. I remember going to kind of like for Seattle Pike's Place market area where it's, food and arts and crafts. And then they also have kind of a cool streetcar that you can ride around through downtown when that's running. It's kind of that looks like it was built like in the 50s or 60s, I guess. So I always enjoyed that vibe of Melbourne, but I'm sorry that you missed that this time.
Yeah, what can you do? Just poor timing.
Exactly. Well, from there, you spend 3 sea days working on your work, reading your book, and heading over towards Fjordland National Park.
It sounds like a great trip, right? I was just working on the sea days.
No, but tell us about Fjordland National Park. I'm not as familiar with it. That's on the southern island of New Zealand, I believe. Could you talk a little bit about what that is? Is that similar to like the fjords up in Norway or maybe like Glacier Bay up in where Alaska is?
Yeah, and I don't have experience in going to Norway or Alaska, but I imagine that there's a lot of similarities. Basically, the way you can envision a sound is it's almost like a river of sorts leading from the ocean, but it just ends. Like there's just an endpoint, so the ship actually has to circle back around into the area close to the ocean and then goes into another sound. And yeah, the notion is that the water is still. There's these towering mountains, in a sense, completely encapsulating you. Some waterfalls at times, birds passing by. They are accessible, I think, by land. At least some of them are, because there were some establishments that were on the coast there, but we didn't get off. So basically, we visited 3 different sounds: Doubtful Sound, Milford Sound, and Dusky Sound. And I think these are like the 3 icons in Fjordland National Park. And these were scattered across the day. So I think it was like, I don't know, like 8 or 9 a.m. and then 2 p.m. and 5 p.m. And it's basically maybe an hour and a half that you're within the sound proper. And we would just go out on the top deck and feel the breeze all around us, sometimes 40 miles per hour's worth. And we were literally blown away, my mom, when we were walking back onto the back indoors. Like the gusts were so intense that like it pushed her and she hit her leg against a railing.
Oh no.
That was not ideal. It was so tranquil. Everybody who thought ahead was up there and taking pictures aplenty. Some people I heard saw some dolphins, but I did not. It was stunning. That was one of the highlights of the trip, because it's one of those moments where you feel very small in the world, and you're just taking in all the beauty completely surrounding you. The one negative, if there is, there was no naturalist or expert to talk about what we were seeing, and that was consistent across the whole voyage. There were no lectures regarding anything Australia or New Zealand or the land that we were passing through, which was absolutely surprising and very disappointing, because we would have appreciated more context. There were some recurring slides on the main huge screen in the lobby that had a few fun facts about each of the destinations, but I imagine we would have valued it even more if I didn't do much studying in advance or looking stuff in advance, because I'm thinking, oh, of course I'll get it on the ship. So, but other than that, it was a miraculous day.
Yeah, it looks pretty amazing. I just pulled up fjordland.org.nz if anybody wants to go and take a look at it, and just some amazing photos of what you guys get to sail through. It looks very similar to Norway, with kind of snow-capped peaks, possibly, depending upon what time you are. They talk about seeing dolphins and seals in different spots. And maybe this is just, I guess my hope is that for those who are sailing, if the Wonder goes down to Fjordland and through this, that Disney being a premium cruise line, right, adds those touches for people that are down there. Although I think a lot of those sailings may be mostly Australians and New Zealanders that are down there, but maybe on the longer ones, hopefully they'll, for some people outside of Australia and New Zealand that venture down there to sail on, they'll add that context for them to be able to really understand what they're seeing. So from there, you guys make your first stop in New Zealand, and is it Dunedin?
I know that was the lingering question for all of us. How do we pronounce the port? I think it's pronounced Dunedin.
Okay, Dunedin. Okay.
And there were a bunch of places that you could visit from here. What we opted for was this excursion that was like a bus tour. And we went to the Albatross Center. The albatross is like this type of bird that has massive wings. We did not go, what was part of the excursion, we did not have a tour. So we did not get to see the birds, which was disappointing. It was basically a lunch stop and look in the exhibit and gift shop. But it was kind of a pit stop en route to this place called Penguin Place, which kind of rehabilitates these yellow-eyed penguins. We learned a lot about different types of penguins down in Australia, New Zealand, and we got to see a few of them in captivity, but also these really cool little shelters for penguins that were scattered across the coast, and we got to see some penguins from a reasonable distance in these little enclosures nesting, and it was really a special treat. Like, you have to pay for a tour like this to be able to have that experience. And we saw some seals on the coast from afar, which was really neat. Not necessarily as remarkable as seeing the penguins, but we still appreciated that. There were beautiful vistas. I think, yeah, it was on this specific excursion in Dunedin where we made a little stop at the world's steepest street, literally. And I can say that because my dad and I walked up half of it. We would have walked the full route, even though our legs would have felt it for the next week. We had limited time, so we couldn't do the full distance. That was quite distinct, to say the least.
Getting the sense that, for the most part of this cruise, a lot of it is really about seeing wildlife and just the beauty of this part of the world versus some of the history, I guess.
Yes and no. I think part of that was, by virtue of the excursions that we opted for. We actually went to a bunch of museums, and we can talk about that later on, because that actually encompasses more of the latter part of the trip. But yeah, we opted for a lot more of the wildlife because we felt like that was something that we couldn't fully appreciate if we were in another geographic area. So I'm glad we did. We didn't feel like it was too much, which was an initial concern that, like, oh, three zoos, 2 wildlife sanctuaries, all these tours. It actually never felt repetitive or boring.
So from there, you get a couple more ports to go before you get to your final stop in Auckland. From there, you get to Christchurch. I've actually been to Christchurch. It's just a cute little town. It was, unfortunately, the downtown was kind of hit by a earthquake years ago, which kind of knocked down. There was a beautiful cathedral that used to be there, and it actually knocked that down. And I think did they replace? Did you go to the downtown? They were going to build a paper cathedral of all things. That it was kind of a Japanese version of it. What did you guys do in Christchurch, and did you make it downtown?
Yes, I had to pause for a second. So our bus tour, we drove through downtown, but we actually didn't walk downtown, which was a disappointment. But that was, again, a reflection of what we chose to do. I think Christchurch is a place where you don't necessarily need an excursion, because there is kind of like Melbourne, these big metropolitan areas, there's a bunch of different attractions that are very accessible that you can do on your own, that you don't feel like you need a tour guide. Because of the excursions that were available, we decided to opt for that. And we went with this one where we actually went to about maybe 45 minutes or so outside of the city to this farm. So we were in actually a more rural area. We got to see a sheep herding and shearing demonstration with a border collie chasing after them. And it was actually quite neat with the whistling, and see how it zips up and down the hill. And talk about the world's steepest street. Those hills were pretty steep, and that dog had a lot of energy. So that was kind of unique. I don't know if we would have had that opportunity elsewhere. It was a frustrating excursion from the standpoint of that we spent too much time at the farm. Like, basically, it was seeing this quick demonstration, maybe 20 minutes or 30 minutes. And then it was like an hour hanging around. And if you wanted a little sausage roll and a biscuit, and we're just kind of sitting around the family farm. And I mean, it was a beautiful environment, but it could have been packed with more stuff. So we would have loved to see more of Christchurch, which, as you're mentioning, is kind of in a state of revitalization. And I know there's a cool museum related to just earthquakes and its history. But yeah, we didn't get to partake in that.
A lot of sheep in New Zealand, from what I remember.
Actually served everywhere too.
Yeah.
And I remember from my flights, that's what we were served coming back home. It was like sheep everywhere.
Did you have any? Well, no, you're a vegetarian. Why am I asking you that?
Yeah, not quite. But I'll tell you, we saw a lot of sheep in our time in the UK years ago. So I think that was the interesting historical part about all of, basically the colonization of New Zealand and Australia by Europeans, and how that completely changed the landscape of the native wildlife. And unfortunately, it was devastating for a lot of the biodiversity. So that's something that I think I had a greater understanding for and appreciation of after being on this trip. And even the sheeping industry or the farming industry and raising sheep has actually gone downhill a lot over recent years, as I came to learn too.
So did you stop at Wellington next?
It was, yeah.
Okay. And so that's where the Hobbit and all the studios were and everything like that. Did you go to Middle Earth at all, or what did you do in Wellington?
I was a pariah. I did not go to Middle Earth. I did not opt for the typical. Guess what I did? I got to see more animals.
You saw some sheep.
See, I like the way Brett tours. This is right up my alley. I have no idea even what you're talking about, which is a surprise to none of our long-term listeners. But what are you talking about, Steve?
The Hobbit, you know what the Hobbit is, and the Lord of the Rings and all that type of stuff. That's where the main movie studio was, and I'm totally Peter Jackson.
Do you know who you're speaking to?
I know.
Why would I know the Lord of the Rings studio?
Because someday they're going to make a popcorn bucket out of it, and you're going to buy it, and you're going to be so excited about it. Right next to Figment.
Disney missed that.
Disney
missed that opportunity. They're not buying Lord of the Rings now.
They did, didn't they?
That ship has sailed.
That ship has sailed. Okay. Well, let's run with what you did then in Wellington there, Brett.
I will say a lot of people did opt for the Middle Earth stuff, because when we're walking back on the ship, they had their gift bags with the Hobbit gear. So there is that. We went to Zealandia, which is this almost like a natural preserve. It's basically this, I think it's 1 square mile roughly of completely protected land. It's kind of an homage to this notion of New Zealand, that area being the 8th continent many millions of years ago. And what they've tried to do in this place is preserve the area and to almost revitalize it to how it would have been millions of years ago, by just letting there be this natural growth of trees and birds aplenty. And we took a guided tour through there with, ironically, an American who just kind of left her life in the States and wanted to follow her dream. And she lives out of a van and loves birds. And it was actually an incredible tour. It's a beautiful place to walk around. They had a great exhibit indoors that it almost felt like, if you remember at Epcot, at the Universe of Energy with the dinosaur diorama, it almost had that feel. There was like a huge widescreen film that was actually like Disney level production, and talked about the history of New Zealand from the standpoint of the native people, the Maori, and colonization. And there was some great lighting and sound effects. I really enjoyed that. Not necessarily the tragic history, but the presentation of such was really good. We took a cable car. They're known for their cable cars in Wellington, and that went down a very steep hill as well, and that afforded some great views from the top. And then, per your point earlier about the history of New Zealand, one of the highlights of any New Zealand experience is going to the National Museum of New Zealand. It's called Te Papa, and it is one of the world's biggest museums and one of the most highly attended as well. And they had some great exhibits on the Maori people and navigating the seas to find this land. There was a whole art installation, a lot related to natural history and animals. It was fantastic. It was everything we wanted to be, but we had an hour and a half because we had built in those prior activities. So even though this was on our own day, you can only package in so much.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but as I understand it, and as I understand it, kind of like this. So Wellington's on the North Island, and the Southern Island has more kind of a British feel to it. And then once you get into the Northern Island, it's definitely has a lot more of the Maori kind of the Polynesian. And I hesitate to say Polynesia because I'm not sure that I'm saying if that's totally correct. But when I think of the Maori people, they're very similar to the people that settled Hawaii and have gone all through Polynesia and everything like that. So you think about kind of those different aspects of that's, I guess, the way I've always kind of understood the difference between the two islands. And did you feel that as you went through the North Island?
Yeah, I think that's a really astute point because I felt like it was the last few days of our trip, the last few ports on the North Island, that we had more of that feel in terms of a greater richness and understanding of the native peoples. And we went to a few places that kind of reinforced that, and some nice visuals too in the museums that kind of showed the paths that the native peoples followed to find these islands. And amazing, following the stars. And I mean, we're constantly thinking of Moana because of some of the themes that were echoed there. And you can see how authentic, in a sense, the film is because of really getting a taste of the culture.
I read the book Hawaii, and the first several chapters of it is all about the people navigating to Hawaii itself. And if anybody goes over to Honolulu, there's actually a museum called the Bishop Museum, and they have a planetarium there, and they do kind of a rudimentary small program there, which is really interesting. If anybody's interested in this, as to how they navigated with the stars, it's really pretty fascinating how they did that.
It is inspiring.
Yeah. so from Wellington, you guys headed up to Napier.
This is an Art Deco type town. The buildings, it feels like you're in Miami, but much smaller scale Miami, a small town, seaside town. We took a bus tour around there. This was kind of an unremarkable place, but it was still pleasant to walk around. And it was kind of like a ho-hum day. Like, we were there for the morning. There was not a lot going on, but it was a chance to get off the ship and see some cool buildings and more of the beautiful terrain.
It sounds like it's the port where you kind of take a break.
Yeah, more or less.
Which you need on a long cruise and a long trip like this.
So from there, your last stop before you get off in Auckland is Tauranga?
Yeah. A lot of people use Tauranga as a gateway to Rotorua, which is toward the center of the island, where there's a lot of geothermal activity. So it's almost like being in a Yellowstone National Park of sorts, but in New Zealand. And boy, did it smell like that. If you've ever been to any of those like mud pits or geysers or other geothermal activity, it smells horrendous, like raw eggs tenfold. But actually, we had a tour scheduled through ShoreX. They never showed up. So we had to quickly reschedule. Like, thankfully, there was a little tour booth right then and there, and we could quickly hop on a different excursion. With a lot of the same sites, we drove to this place called Te Pua, which is almost like a cultural center of sorts. We saw the native kiwi bird. That's their national bird. And it's a flightless bird that is rather huge, and it almost runs around like a little roadrunner. It's adorable. And they are nocturnal. And so the exhibit, it's completely dark, and you can barely see where you're walking around, but then there's a little light and you can kind of see the shadow of the kiwi bird. The highlight there, though, was the demonstration of some of the singing and dancing by the Maori people. I should preface that I don't remember exactly how tribe or group of people identify. Their roots are Maori. That was remarkable. It was in this beautiful structure. It almost felt like, and this is awful for me to say, it almost felt like an extreme version of the Enchanted Tiki Room. In terms of just the structure really echoing that Polynesian flair. It was stunning. There were a few hundred people in here, and at the front were maybe about a dozen performers. They were singing, they were dancing, they were using various instruments. We got to see some of the traditions and learning about the language too. There was a storytelling vibe to it. It was, I don't know, maybe 30 minutes long or so. It almost felt like a high quality Disney performance, but the difference is this is pretty authentic, and authentic as it comes. And they invited boys and men to come on stage to do some of the chanting and to figure out how to emulate some of the tribes where certain rituals you would like stick your tongue out. If you've watched some performances by Maori people, that's a very big thing where you just do like it's interesting to say the least. And I just really appreciated having that space. It felt like it was a more real New Zealand experience, even if we were not completely involved in the culture. At least we had a surface level understanding, and then complemented by going to the museum. So, because you want that too, and there was what I totally appreciated, and I think this is worth saying for anybody who visits New Zealand, they have a much stronger appreciation for the native and indigenous people than I think we do here in the States. And I think we have a lot to learn from that. In every exhibit we visited in New Zealand, it was written in both English and Native Maori. A lot of the merchandise felt like it was really honoring the peoples and the animals and the culture. I dug that vibe. I think that's worth highlighting. And I think if anybody makes it out to Taronga to take a little bus ride or ride over to Rotorua and to see Te Pua, it's worth it.
Do you have any pictures of that?
I do. I'm happy to pass those along.
Yeah, if you'd pass those on, I'd love to put that on, because it sounds like just almost the perfect way to end this cruise. The next day you're in Auckland, but what a way to kind of to cap it off as you finish this just amazing cruise between Australia and New Zealand, Brett.
Yeah, it was a nice ending.
So from there, you guys are into Auckland, and the cruise ends. We don't have to talk about getting off unless there's anything exciting about that. But we
got off quickly. We were happy about that.
Right. So you spent a couple days in Auckland. What did you think of Auckland? Auckland, I think of as kind of more like a Seattle / a Boston sort of city, by the sea. Maybe not quite the same vibes, but I know that the America's Cup is very big in New Zealand and Australia, and I know that they sail at. They've had several races here in Auckland. What was Auckland like?
Yeah, I think the Seattle comparison is probably pretty appropriate. Yeah, the worst weather we faced on our trip was in Auckland from the standpoint of the temperature and rain. We actually didn't have much rain most of the trip, but we did in Auckland. We were kind of disappointed, quite honestly, by Auckland. I think we had set our expectations rather high, perhaps as high as Sydney. We enjoyed Sydney a lot more. Auckland, we took a fantastic walking tour, a free walking tour. Sign up for one if you're in any of these huge cities. The person was a native New Zealander. He was funny. He was engaging. One of the highlights of the trip. So definitely do that if you visit any major city worldwide. A free walking tour. You're paying what you feel like they deserve, and you know what, they give it their all. We've done this in Barcelona, in New York City, and a bunch of places. The Auckland Zoo was fantastic, much like the Taronga Zoo in Sydney. They had a really enveloping orangutan exhibit, some others related to native Australian animals. The zoos they put so many of the US zoos to shame in terms of how much they invest in them and the quality of care for the animals too. And I think generally zoos are getting better, but they were just fantastic. We went to the National Museum, the main aquarium of New Zealand. There might be multiple, but there was one main one in Auckland, and that was fairly underwhelming, but it was nice because it was raining outside. We went to the main art museum there, which was fine. It wasn't huge. Been to much better art museums. We would have wanted to take advantage of more outdoor activities, but the weather didn't really lend itself to it. And there was also a lot of construction going on in the city. They're I think, very much redeveloping a lot of the public transit. And so there was a lot of construction. I'm glad we went to Auckland, and there were some great sites. I think it just perhaps didn't live up to our expectations, and the weather probably hampered that too. But nonetheless, we were very ready to get home after 2.5 weeks on our travels, and it was still a nice conclusion. We had a wonderful trip there.
Well, thanks, Brett, for coming on and sharing your experiences. You guys sailed around Australia and New Zealand on the Norwegian Cruise Line Spirit. Kind of thinking back on this trip, what tips would you have for people going down there? And would you recommend this as a way to be able to really see New Zealand and Australia as far as trying to get a feel of the culture, the landscape, the people? Did a cruise meet your expectations?
I think it's a hard question to answer, just because I think everybody goes into a trip like this with different expectations, right? You know, if you're making the trip, especially from the States or anywhere that's half a world away, you need to allocate a couple of weeks. Otherwise, I mean, it's hard to justify the cost and the investment that you're making. The time, the planning, the fact that with like we needed, forget the traditional passports, you needed specific documentation to go into each Australia, New Zealand, and apps and stuff to download. Like it's a lot of coordination. So spend 2 weeks. That's the biggest tip, at least. I think a cruise did serve as a wonderful mechanism to cover a lot. We still came away from it wishing we had more time in a sense, although by the end of it, we were all ready to get back, but more time from the standpoint of, because our time on land, each city was a day. This is what we dealt with on our transatlantic cruise and British Isles cruise when we were in each of the European ports for a day. It's like, gosh, there's still so much more to see. I'm glad I can get back on the ship and not have to change hotel rooms, and I have a meal right there for me. But it's that desire of wanting more because you get a taste of it and you're not fully nourished. I think we would make a separate trip probably just to New Zealand, because we would have wanted to take advantage of Wellington for sure. Wellington was our highlight in New Zealand among the cities. You have to go in with the mindset of that, and we did this, and I think we felt good about it. You try not to put too much on your plate for each day. You pick one or two main things. You immerse yourself in that. If it's through an excursion option, great. If it's on your own, probably best to situate that with one of the bigger cities like a Wellington or Melbourne, where there is a lot right then and there. Same with Christchurch. You have to keep your expectations aligned. I think we knew that the ship wasn't going to be fantastic. And you know what? Maybe it was a self-fulfilling prophecy, but we still are glad we took this particular voyage. It served the purpose. And we made a lot of incredible memories. Like, I don't think we ever would have thought that this was possible when we first floated the idea around, when I was a kid, like the idea of going to New Zealand and or Australia. And so the cruise, because we're now familiar with cruising, it made it feel much more accessible and comfortable. And I think it elevated that desire of returning back and having more intentional time in specific places that probably would be costlier as opposed to the cruise option, and would require a lot more planning. But I think there would be a greater sense of confidence now that we've been there and know what to expect. I should also mention too, the obvious, English-speaking countries. So there's not that barrier that exists for a lot of folks who are intimidated by cultural differences from a language perspective. But I'll say it felt like like Auckland and Sydney felt like world cities. Like they were very global, people from all over the world. And I love that. Like you really feel like you're part of something bigger. So tips: plan early, plan far in advance, keep your expectations aligned, know what your highlights are, and try to be present. I think there were moments where, we did so much planning, but we realized we needed to just enjoy the moment. And even though we were rushed at times, we tried to take those moments to just embrace where we were and take a lot of pictures. So it was a very fulfilling trip.
Well, I love the way you said that, and you put it much more eloquently than I could ever do it. But I think the cruises, I think that's the beauty of cruising, is you get to see such a broad, variety of places now, and it opens up the doors for places that you want to go back and explore maybe a little bit deeper. So I'm glad you guys just had a wonderful experience that way down in Australia, New Zealand. Christy, any final thoughts before we get out of here?
You went to many zoos, the wildlife preserve place. You had animals galore. Which was your favorite? And if you say the snake with legs, we're never letting you back on again.
The poor skink.
The skink was cool. Well, I think my dad would say the dingoes because he took an amazing picture of the dingo puppies. I think for me, it's like the battle of the koalas versus kangaroos. I can just see a matchup in like a boxing ring, because those are the hallmarks. I probably would say the kangaroos. And mind you, there's also a lot of varieties of kangaroos too, and then the wallabies. So I think having the opportunity to engage with them really closely was special. And even in the zoos, like you can get pretty close to them, like very, very close. I was surprised. So that interactivity. And I guess it sounds like you should go to the Detroit Zoo if you want a taste of it in the States. So Yeah, I mean it's very generic, but I would say the kangaroos were really cool to engage with and see in a variety of different places. I wish we were able to see them in their natural habitats, but we weren't far enough in the outback, I suppose, to see them. And of course, their numbers have declined. But the wildlife was top notch. It was the biodiversity down there is probably on par with what I hear about Costa Rica or some of those places in Central and South America. Very cool.
So when we went to Melbourne, my dad and I did a bike trip, rode along the Great Ocean Road and everything like that. And we were so excited to see, we did see some koalas up in there. There's a certain tree. What's the tree that they like to climb? I forget now.
They love bamboo.
Eucalyptus, I think.
Eucalyptus, yes.
Eucalyptus, because they chew on the eucalyptus leaves and everything like that. And I really wanted to see kangaroos, and we finally saw them the last day. And there's like, I don't know if it's called a herd or what they are of kangaroos, but they were all throughout this entire golf course. We're riding along. There's a golf course over there, and there's like hundreds of kangaroos in the golf course. So I'm not sure that that's quite the natural habitat of the kangaroo, but we definitely got to see them too. So.
So I have to share my wildlife story then. This was one of my favorite memories, and definitely my favorite memory from my trip to Australia. I got to hold a baby koala bear. And it like gripped onto my shoulder with its little koala hands. And it was just, it was like holding a child, frankly. And it just sat there and snuggled in. Oh, that was a good memory.
I love it.
I can imagine.
Well, Brett, what's next for you then? First of all, congratulations. I don't even know if I've talked to you since you got your doctorate. So congratulations on finishing up that. So that's why your parents were out cruising, because you're so busy working on your PhD. I want to say
Dr. Brett. That's what we need to start calling you now.
Thanks.
But what's next for you?
Oh, too many trips, but no cruises on the docket. I'm awful. My parents have cruises on the docket. I'm not joining them on them. Yeah, there's some international trips going to, assuming it works out, and it should. My partner leads a study abroad, or co-leads a study abroad in London, Paris. So Disneyland Paris for the very first time is going to happen. Yes. I hope in 4 months from now. Yeah, so there'll be a little bit of European travel, some domestic travels. I'm doing a lot of traveling these days for conferences and to be with my partner. But yeah, it's a lot of fun. But I think Australia, New Zealand it's going to be hard to top that for a long while.
Yeah, Disneyland Paris, I'm excited for you to go there. I've heard so many different things, and I know that just the beauty of that park, I think, is really going to resonate with you, Brett. So good for you to be able to experience it with your partner and whatnot over there. I'd be remiss also, too, you run an amazing podcast. I love listening to your episodes as they come out, touching on books and films and musical scores. For people that want to follow you in your podcast, Brett, I would want to give you a chance to talk about that so they can connect with you there.
Sure. Yeah, I'll be concise. Yeah, Notably Disney. You can find it wherever you download podcasts. One recent interview that was really cool is with Henry Jackman, not Hugh Jackman's brother. Henry Jackman is a composer, and he is responsible for some incredible scores, including most recently for Strange World, the Disney animated film that nobody saw, but is fantastic. You can watch it on Disney Plus for free, so do give it some love. His score is incredible. He did the score. He was responsible for the score for Wreck-It Ralph and its sequel, Big Hero 6. So that was quite a get, and he was wonderful to talk with. On the horizon are some fun conversations related to an upcoming Disney exhibit in the US. So I'm going to be talking with someone interesting associated with one of those. There's many exhibits actually online, so that'll be a little preview of that. A trivia showdown of people who have won past editions of Tunes and Quotes trivia. So if you want to figure out how adept you are with your Disney songs and quotes from the parks and films, that'll be a fun episode to listen to. But yeah, there's a library of more than 100 episodes of interviews and discussions, and it's been a blast. It's been 4 years now, and it's gone by remarkably fast. Steve was very helpful as I was getting ready to launch a podcast and thinking through some ideas, and it's nice to be on the other side of it and yeah, produce some good content, talk with fun people, interview some idols of mine in the musical and book world. So it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, if you're anybody who's interested in a lot of that history and the stories behind some of the music and the written word with Disney, is just a great podcast to listen to. So thank you so much for all that you do for the Disney podcasting community, Brett, because I think it's got a little niche that not enough people delve into, and I love the stories that we get to hear. And I think that Christy and I need to come on the trivia show and see how low we can score, because I don't think that we get one.
I want to see more Disney Cruise Line trivia with you all.
We need to do that again too.
Yeah.
And when we put that together, we will definitely bring you on for that, Brett. So, well, thank you again, Brett, for taking time out of your busy day and recounting your trip down to New Zealand and Australia with us. We really do appreciate it, and we want to wish you all the best in your travels coming up and everything going on with your life. And we look forward to talking to you soon.
Yeah, thanks so much, Steve and Christy. Yeah, pleasure to talk with you both. And continued good work with all of you. There's always a plethora of podcast episodes on the docket for me. So I enjoy learning from all of you too.
All right, all the best, Brett, and we'll talk to you soon. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.
Well, that's going to wrap up our show today. Once again, I really want to thank Brett for coming on and sharing his and his family's experiences. They sailed around Australia and New Zealand for the first time with Norwegian Cruise Line, and we look forward to the Disney Wonder heading down there for the first time this winter, and can't wait to see all the pictures and hear the stories for everybody that gets that opportunity to do one of those once-in-a-lifetime Trans-Pacifics, or just sailing around just two beautiful countries down there in the Southern Hemisphere. As always, we'd like to give a huge shout out to our Patreon supporters. They help bring this show to you each and every week ad-free. If you'd like to find out how you can support the show, you can go to patreon.com/DCL podcast and find out all the information there. Well, it is June and summer is just about upon us. If you are headed out on a Disney cruise, headed out with Adventures by Disney this summer, getting ready for one of those virtual Run Disney races, the 5Ks that, just kind of cool medals that they had this year, or just spending time with family and friends, on behalf of all of us here at the DCL podcast, myself, Steve, Christy, Nova, and Lake, we want to wish you to be well, enjoy time with family and friends, and we'll see you next time on the DCL podcast. The DCL podcast is not affiliated with the Disney Cruise Line, Walt Disney Company, Adventures by Disney, or Run Disney. All of the opinions expressed on our shows are those of the hosts and the guests who appear on the show. If you have any questions about any of these products, please contact the Walt Disney Company.